What is the largest animal on the planet? Many of you probably already know the answer to this fun fact, the blue whale. But did you know it's the biggest animal on Earth in our known history, even bigger than dinosaurs? Welcome to After the Fact. For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Dan LeDuc. In this latest episode in our Scientists at Work series, we're turning our attention to a big subject, the blue whale. And since they can be longer than 100 feet, 100 is our data point for this episode, that's a big subject indeed. Sri Lankan marine biologist Asha de Vos, who is also a Pew Marine Fellow, is passionate about these unique mammals. Over the past several decades, Asha has ventured into the waters of the northern Indian Ocean to study blue whales. By learning about their migratory patterns, mating habits, and other behaviors, she's helping the world better understand the vital role of blue whales in the ocean ecosystem. She's even founded an organization called Ocean's Well to support research and protection of this species, of which little is known and upon which the ocean depends. Tell us about blue whales.
Well, blue whales are the largest animal that's ever roamed the planet.
Bigger than dinosaurs.
Bigger by mass than any dinosaur that we've ever had roaming this planet, right? And I think that's something for people to remember, because I think, you think about it, it's such a privilege to live on this planet today side by side with the giant of our, historically the biggest animal that's ever lived, right? And I think it's a pretty special thing to hold on to. And just kind of celebrate and remember that we have a responsibility.
Yes, but let help us conceptualize size. What are we to compare it to something that we know?
So a blue whale can grow as large as a basketball court. So they're pretty long, The tongue is as heavy as an African elephant. So if you can think of an African elephant and you think about trying to carry that, it's not fun, I'm sure.
You do not want a whale to lick you.
No, right, right? Slapped out of the way. They weigh about as much as 40 African elephants. So these are really huge animals. But I think the most fun fact about them is that their throats, their esophagus is so small that they could choke on a loaf of bread.
Really?
They have to eat lots of small things all the time. And that's kind of the thing. They're designed to eat. If you Google it, Wikipedia tells you that they feed on krill. In Sri Lanka, we break all these stereotypes. So our blue whales feed on shrimp, which there is a difference and it has implications. So that, these are these tiny things that are probably the size of, your little finger. And to think that this animal has grown to this immense size by feeding on something that small. But it makes sense because these are things that don't swim actively away from the whale when the whale's approaching it, which is great because you're not wasting energy chasing down your food.
Yeah. So they are magnificent. They're like mythical. Moby Dick, right? It's part of our history and culture and literature. But that's not why you work with them.
No. And I think that's a really important thing that I want everyone to know is, yes, I totally think these animals are majestic and beautiful and charismatic, and there's just so much mystery, around them. But to care for them and to protect them for just that reason is not good enough, because I think we have to remember that they are actually what we call ecosystem engineers. Their survival is so integral to the proper functioning of the entire ecosystem, right? So my fun fact is I love whale poop. They dive to the depths, right, into these areas where it's dark, but there's food, but there's nutrients that you don't get in the surface waters. So things like iron and nitrogen, we all need a certain amount of nutrients in our diet, right? So do they. And so they'll dive to these areas, they'll take these massive gulpfuls, they'll swallow them, then they'll come up to the surface to breathe. And as they do so, they kind of release these gigantic fecal plumes, right? And so as they do so, you think they're releasing all these nutrients into these surface waters. So it's fertilizer for the surface communities. And on the surface of our oceans, we get tiny microscopic plants called plankton, which are, the base of every single food web. So they, like all plants, need fertilizer to grow. And so I always say they feed on sunshine, and including these nutrients in their diet. When it's available, that means they can grow and proliferate. And then they, photosynthesize and release oxygen into the environment.
Let's talk more about them. In addition to their usual what bears do in the woods and whales do in the ocean, they're their bodies themselves, when they pass on, become also a part of the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
How does that work?
Yeah, so you think about it, a dead carcass is obviously a feast for so many animals, right? And so at the surface, there are lots of sharks and birds that will come and feast on this dead whale. And as it descends to the depth, in those areas, you don't have sunlight penetrating. So you don't have these typical processes of plants that kind of photosynthesize and produce whatever is necessary to run a food web. And in those deep, dark places, there's limited food. So there are animals that live in these areas that basically just sort of they have evolved to survive without daily meals, and so it's a feast for these species that are down there. And I think there's a very big dependency for these carcasses. So that's part of that cycle of life, right? That the dead whale is important. It's important it stays in the water so it can sink to these places where there wouldn't be food otherwise.
And what are the numbers we're talking about in terms of whale population and the decline?
Yeah, so I always find that a really interesting question. We say that there's probably about 10,000 blue whales left in the world. We say that that's a very small fraction of what was there. Maybe we probably declined our populations of blue whales between 70 to 90% during the whaling period. So that's a lot of animals to take out of the oceans. Mm-hmm. I also want to draw attention to the fact that when we say that we're giving a blanket number to blue whales in general, but in the ocean there's about 5 different populations of blue whales, right? And each population, they may or may not be genetically distinct, but they may have a different acoustic dialect in these different places. They feed on different things. They're very adapted to live in that specific area. So while there are 10,000 blue whales, if you wiped out the population, say, out of Sri Lanka, we're losing a very important, very different group of whales. These subspecies are very specifically adapted to a particular area in very many ways. And we have to protect all these subspecies. So we have to focus and study these different groups independently and come up with conservation solutions that work in that area rather than a blanket conservation solution for all blue whales across the world. There's only been one documented blue whale birth, and that was actually in Sri Lanka. A female had washed ashore and then they'd try to pull her out. This is some time ago, and maybe even in the 40s. And then she'd given birth and then gone off. But that's the only documented pregnancy or birth that we've ever had.
Wow.
It's like this amazing,
So there's a lot more to know.
So much more. Yeah. The ocean is such an incredible place because of all its magical secrets.
Yeah. So the cool thing about Sri Lanka, right, is that so many of the whales are close to the coastline. It makes it easier to study them.
Typically, they do these long-range migrations to cold places, feed, and then they come to warm places to breed and calve. Now, the big thing that I found was that actually the blue whales that I work with around Sri Lanka, they're not doing these long-range migrations. So my eureka moment was actually when I saw an aggregation of blue whales and a floating pile of whale poop. Because I was like, well, this is warm and tropical. It's 5 degrees above the equator. And if they're pooping, that means they're feeding somewhere close. So that showed us that these blue whales are actually kind of not actually leaving warm waters at any point in their lives, which is, I think, a very exciting thing. Really mirrors my life and my comfort zones as well, right? So I think it's a match made in heaven.
So you study the species, but these creatures are amazing. Do you get to know them individually at all when you're out there?
Yeah, so we use, we spend time on the water. We do see individuals. There's still a lot of individuals I don't know, but there's this one particular whale that's kind of a special story. And we use this really simple technique called photo identification, which is we just get out there with our cameras, we take pictures of particular parts of the whale's body and look for permanent markings. So they can be scars, they can be, patterns. And we use these, they have to be long-term permanent marks that we can use and reuse to identify the animals over and over again. And I think it's a great technique because anyone can do it. Like if you're a whale watcher and you go out and you see a whale and you take these pictures, they're really handy for scientists. So I think whoever's listening, like if you ever go out whale watching and you take pictures of whales, ask the people on the boat if there's any way you can send these photographs to scientists who might need them to identify these animals.
This is crowdsourcing whales.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so important because, you can tell so many things from this data. Everything from like how big is the population, right? This is a very simple technique to do it. It's a very safe way to do it. It takes time. So that's why we need more and more people submitting their photographs. But this particular special individual, I was on a documentary shoot off the northeast coast of Sri Lanka. And I happened to take photographs of these whales that day. And then I looked at this one tail fluke. So that's just the tail of the animal. And I was like, wow, like so beautiful. And it had these particular markings. And then I thought, I'm sure I've seen this individual before. So I went back into the literature and lo and behold, there was that whale, right? And it's these markings, and you can see how long-term they are because when I saw the whale, it was 27 years later. Right? So we don't know what that whale had done in the intervening years. We don't know because where we saw it was just 10 kilometers away from where it was seen 27 years earlier, right? Which is nuts. So we don't know. It could have hung around there all that time, or it could have packed its bags and gone on a big journey and come back, right? But this kind of information, one thing is we can tell demographic information about age and stuff like that. But then also the other important thing is if we start to see individuals coming back to the same areas, we start to realize that these are priority areas for conservation because there's a reason they're coming back. They're dependent on the area. Then we can focus our conservation efforts on areas. So a simple tool can give us so much important information in science.
And this, you get to know these as individuals. Do you name them?
Yeah, that's the fun part. This whale's called Valentine.
I like that.
I like that you like it.
Does the blue whale that you study have a distinctive sound?
Yeah, so I think when we think of whales, everybody thinks about humpback whale song, and humpback whale song is pretty incredible. Like it's very complicated, and there's a lot of singing, and it evolves every year, and it's very complex. But blue whales have what we call a stable call. So if you record it, like if I recorded it in 1983 and I recorded a blue whale again in the same area 20, 30 years later, it's pretty much the same call. So we don't see much change, which is interesting. Blue whale calls, I always think they're like these low rumbling jet engines. They're so low frequency. So if I dropped an underwater microphone or a hydrophone in the water and I tried to listen, I wouldn't be able to hear it because it's outside our hearing range. So we have to put it on our computers, speed it up so we can put it into the hearing range of a human. And then it's like this really deep rumble, right? And it's, to me, like when I listen to it, I can feel it in my chest. It's like a vibration. It's a really powerful sound and it's like nothing you've ever heard. So yes, it's like a jet engine, but you really have to hear it yourself.
But if you were out there, you couldn't unless you had all this equipment to do it.
Exactly.
We had this wonderful Save the Whales period. A lot of progress was made. But where do things stand now? I mean, the blue whales that you study are not safe.
No, and that's the thing, So if you look at a map of shipping routes around the world, the south coast of Sri Lanka is one of the busiest highways in the world. And of course, because, everything from Singapore to Dubai goes through that area. Those are two of the biggest ports in the world. Sri Lanka is in a very strategic position as a result in terms of shipping. And historically, we have been. We've had sailors come through all the time. We were part of these very important routes, right? But, I mean, it's great to be in a strategic position, but then, there are implications of that. So since the 70s, global shipping has doubled. But around places like Sri Lanka, it's quadrupled.
Wow.
Because trade is changing, right? And so we're seeing that impact. And it's just a numbers game. When you have more whales, you have whales and more boats, at some point you're going to have more collisions, right? And so that's one of the big things I've been working on is like, how do we resolve this problem? But that doesn't mean we have to only be part of that problem. We can also be part of the solution. And so we have been working towards coming up with recommendations for the government so that we can try to reduce this ship collision problem. And we have recommendations. I mean, one of the main things is 90% of that traffic is actually not stopping in Sri Lanka. So they're just bypassing our coastline. And so if we ask them to move 20 kilometers offshore, which is a tiny amount, then we can actually reduce that risk of lethal ship strike by like 80%.
Tell us more about Ocean Swell. What does it do?
Yeah, so Ocean Swell is a marine conservation, in fact, Sri Lanka's first marine conservation research and education organization. And we focus on doing the research that has conservation impact. So we work on the blue whales, looking at the ship strike problem. We're at the advocacy stage for that. We work with, the other problem is whale watching is it's grown, but it's a little out of control. So we're trying to figure out how do we create a more sustainable whale watching industry, not just for the whales, but also for the livelihoods that depend on it. So we do research like that that's really impactful, that can drive change on the ground. And we actually go to the government. We do outreach. So we do everything around pushing the message and also trying to get the government to change policy at the highest level.
Right.
I'm all about influencing the world.
We've moved beyond the ocean. We're talking the globe right now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I just think the ocean is like this magical space, and there's so much amazing imagery, right? But people know more about what's happening in outer space than we do about our oceans. And it's most of our doorstep. Not everybody's, but it's accessible, right? And so, I mean, it's frustrated me for a long time, and I've been, talking to people about why and stuff, and there's loads of reasons. But the point is, we need to start creating an ocean-conscious public.
What is it like being out on the water, on the Indian Ocean?
It is, I mean, to me, it's just the most spectacular experience. First of all, you get away from everything, but you're still working, so it's okay. And, it's so let me describe, like the first time I saw blue whales, I was on this whale research vessel. We were off the southeast coast of Sri Lanka. And it was this spectacular day. It was this beautiful, flat, calm day. Just like, it was like being on a pond. But it was just amazing day. And at that time, the whale research vessel I was working on, we were tracking sperm whales acoustically. So we had a hydrophone in the water. We were collecting the sounds, listening, and then trying to figure out where the whales are because we had to do work with them, right? And so the pilot house of the vessel, we had the whale sounds on basically loudspeaker. So all day, all night, we were listening to sperm whales. And sperm whales have
you were like jamming to the whales.
It was amazing, right? Because they have a very characteristic call. They have a click sound. So it's like, that's literally what it sounds like. So you imagine all these whales making this sound at once, and it's like just surrounding you, right? So I can hear this sound emanating through the floor of the vessel from where I was standing. I'm looking out on this flat ocean, looking for these whales, thinking, wow, they're out here somewhere, right? I know they're here. And I want to be this first person to see them. And I'm straining into the sun, like, my shift is coming to an end. I'm getting really frustrated because I want to be the one. You can't even blink because you're so worried you'll miss that thing, right? Because it's a vast space. And if you do blink, sometimes you miss some incredible, this moment. And so it is about being alert. And I mean, the ocean has taught me so many things as a result. I've learned to become a lot more patient. I've learned to expect the unexpected because there are things that have happened that I would never have predicted at the start of the day. And I also think that, just learning that we are a tiny, 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 tiny drop in an incredibly large space. And we are actually pretty insignificant. And it gives you a sense of perspective. I'm just excited to see the change that's happening on the ground and the impact that's possible with one big, audacious dream.
Asha, thanks so much. Good luck with the dreams.
Thank you.
To learn more about Asha's important work with blue whales and see some photos, visit pewtrust.org/afterthefact. And as always, if you liked what you heard here, please give us a review on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever you listen. Thanks for joining us.
After the Fact is produced by the Pew Charitable Trusts.